Good morning and welcome to my August 16th, 2026. This is video number 20, and in this video I want to talk more about Jesus. The thing is that I realize that I'm going against a powerful and long time belief that we've had about Jesus based from the Bible. And here I am, a modern person, saying, I've had experiences where I was communicating with God through my own memories. God was giving me memories back from everlasting life. Jesus is everlasting life. It's real and true. And I know what I'm saying clashes very much so with those beliefs that are ingrained. But I think before I begin, I'm gonna kind of give you my own personal experience with Jesus and with religion. So I said that I am from everlasting life. Jesus is everlasting life. And the way God designed it, human beings have a soul, and Father, our Creator, has the power to withdraw our souls from our biology. And our souls exist in God's dimension, outside of the physical universe. And God Himself is not in any way within our universe. God is on the outside. So God creates the universe and then steps back. And then the decisions that we make are our own. And like I said, the universe is everlasting life except for the earth. Earth is not part of EL until the day after Judgment Day. But God takes part in raising His infant intelligence, which is what the earth is, an infant intelligence planet. And He does so through us. We help God with the interventions that happen on the earth. People from everlasting life choose themselves. Nobody is the chosen one. And then, because God has the power to withdraw our souls upon the conception of a specifically chosen vessel on the infant intelligence planet, then God inserts that soul from everlasting life into that person. So it's kind of like reincarnation, but I don't know how you want to think of it. But so when I say I am from everlasting life, then that is what I mean. My soul belongs to Azkirith in everlasting life, not to the infant intelligence human being that I am here on the earth. So when I die, I will wake up in everlasting life, but it will be with no memories about my life here on the earth. And so this is how God designed it, and it's been done like this since the very second universe cycle. And so people from everlasting life have been helping God raise His infant intelligence. And the goal is for infant intelligence to get to today's technology, and then the awakening era happens. The awakening era always happens before Judgment Day on an infant intelligence planet. So there's going to be 4+1 signs that Judgment Day is near, and I just made a video about that yesterday. And you're not going to find these in the Bible, by the way. So, like I said, God places us. So you tell Father that you want to help Him raise infant intelligence. You choose yourself. Then before we're born here, after we lie down in our life pods in everlasting life to go to sleep, God withdraws our souls, and then we are soul to God's infinite image. And that is when God prepares us for our lives, tells us about our challenges. And then God always asks, do you still choose yourself? And then you have a chance to back out if you don't want to have that experience. And so that means that everybody, and there's millions of people from everlasting life, has been specifically placed by God. We're organized. And so God placed me in the most atheistic country in the world, Czechoslovakia. That is where I was born. And so my background with religion is null. There is none. I grew up with zero talking about God or religion, but Christmas is really special, or was at least back then in my country. Christmas was a tradition where Jesus is the one who brought presents, specifically baby Jesus brought all the presents. And so I grew up excited about Christmas and baby Jesus visiting. I knew Jesus was, I don't think I even knew about God and that Jesus was God's son. I didn't know the details surrounding the religious beliefs regarding Jesus. And so I grew up with never going to church, never talking about God, unless it's Christmas, never talking about Jesus. And I've since thought about that, like, why did God place me there? But another thing about my childhood is that I had very absent parents. So I come from a mixed family. So my mom and dad, my birth mom and dad, divorced when I was 2. Then my dad was a single dad because my dad had custody of me for a couple of years. Then he remarried a woman who had 2 kids. But the way I was raised was that they never told us that we weren't real siblings. And so I thought that was my mom, and I thought my brother and sister were my real brother and sister. And my dad worked out of town. We lived in a small city called Kadaň. And my dad worked out of town and was only home like once a month for a week because he worked in Prague in construction. And so my dad was never really there. And my stepmom, she kind of let us do whatever. And then there was like a couple of times a week that I remember that she would actually go somewhere. I think she was going to pin class. So it's like exercise with pins. And she would leave us home alone. Us 3 kids, which don't do that. That's a bad idea. Kids have a very high imagination on how to hurt themselves and get into trouble. But so my childhood was very wild. I was kind of a wild child. I don't remember ever having talks with my parents where they would like teach me anything, and there was no books in my house. I don't remember ever. Maybe there were, but I didn't notice them. I don't remember ever reading any books before I started school, which was because of my birthday. So it would have been, I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is that like I had no parental guidance, no spiritual guidance, not really any emotional guidance. I raised myself in a way. And when I started school, that is the first time that I picked up a pen to write. So I didn't know anything. No, not a single letter of the alphabet. Not a single number. I was like, everything was new to me when I started school. And so I really had nothing that's the root of my beliefs from my childhood. So I know a lot of you probably do have that, where it's like a seed that your parents planted, and that seed has grown roots. And now here I come along and I'm telling you that seed that has given you comfort and relief, hope, I'm telling you that seed has been based on untruths, somebody made up and wrote down. Writers are very powerful, especially writers from long ago when there was very few of them, because writers are the shepherds, readers are the sheep. And that works anytime anybody speaks to you or anything you read. When you receive language information, you're a sheep, because they might reach you in a way and guide your thinking, change your beliefs. So this is why Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, because it is okay to copy Jesus's thinking. It's safe. That's what guides you to everlasting life. So when I was 9, my stepmom divorced my dad. She left, and she took, of course, her kids, and suddenly I was an only child. And besides this being very upsetting, we had moved to Prague at that point, actually, and my dad actually worked right outside our apartment. So suddenly I was the only child. I was alone a lot again, because I would come home before my dad came home from work. So I was usually home alone for, I guess, about 3 hours. But this is when I kind of got to know my dad a little bit more. And sometimes when it was nice, we would go for a walk in Prague. And we would go after it was dark sometimes, because my dad liked to look at the stars. And this is when my dad started to sometimes talk about God. And I was kind of like, I didn't really understand the concept of God as creator. It was just like, God to me was like an idea of a man in the sky. So it was kind of like the all-knowing man in the sky. And my dad would say, I want to know God, and I hope God can forgive me. for all my undoings. And he started to talk from the heart. Things like that. And I would just hold his hand and we would look up at the stars and listen. And I would listen to my dad. And that is kind of like where I started to long to kind of understand what God is. Only during those moments, I want to add. But my dad's longing, and when my dad started to seek God, seek the Creator, that is when I can say I would sometimes in my adulthood look back upon, and through my dad's desire to know God, it kind of imprinted on me. But like I said, it's not like I would go home and think about it. I didn't even know the Bible existed, and I that was it. I didn't know where you would turn to find God. And so a couple years later, my dad, I guess, had been planning to escape my country, because back then it was a communist country. And so we immigrated. And that whole process was very upsetting to me, and but now we were in Austria, and the government placed us as refugees in this tiny little town in Austria called Breitenfeld. And Breitenfeld was just adorable. It was just such a quaint, small little farm town. It wasn't even a town, it was like a village. And there across the street was a little church. Such a cute little authentic, I guess, Catholic church. And sometimes we would all go to a church there. But I didn't speak English. I didn't speak German at that point yet. But then I remember there were times where I would sit on the pew and I had no idea what was being said, what the sermon was, but it was just such a mood. I don't know if you've ever been in an old authentic church, but I would start crying. And I would kind of like hide my tears and stuff. I don't know why. I just always made me cry. And then something happened, and we were transferred from Breitenfeld. I can't really remember the name of that new little village, but I think it was Laben. And there, the hostess, she was Catholic, and my dad again began reading the Bible, and not that he ever like read it with me. He was doing this all on his own, on separates. Like, he actually never really did he talk to me. Maybe he might have, because for some reason I can't remember, but I got asked if I wanted to get baptized, and so I got baptized. That is how I got my middle name. And it was like a whole day of celebration, but I didn't really know like what it meant. Like, it really didn't mean much to me. I was just kind of like in the environment that it kind of like I don't want to say pushed me, but convinced me that this was a good thing to do. So by all means and purposes, I'm Catholic. I was baptized Catholic. But then the move to Canada happened in 1990. And there was never any thought of God or Jesus. I just kind of lived my life trying to fit in with the Canadian children, and I sure made sure that was it. I gave up everything, like every Christmas. It was not that I really celebrated Christmas with Santa, but when I did have children, I believe that, it was the thing to do was to just talk about Santa. But since then, when they were actually a little bit older, I had told them about my Christmas's experiences, and they prefer that. Being adult children, or adults, I guess, they celebrate Christmas with me on the 24th instead of the 2 days. And although neither of my children are religious, I don't want to say, I never had those conversations with my own children. That being said, my neighbor at some point, she was this Sunday school teacher, and she took them for a summer, and they actually did go to Bible camp. But, I think as parents, that is who has the most power to give our children that seed to seek the Creator. And so, unfortunately, I never did that. And when I look back, I have many regrets as a parent. But that is definitely my biggest one, is not giving them Jesus in their lives. God, to me, even now, like after my experiences, I remember my friendship with God, and it means a lot to me. But there's just something about Jesus. When I think about Jesus, it's like a brother. I love Jesus like I would love my brother. It's like, because Jesus is one of us. He's a human being, just like us. And so Jesus is what shines to me from the Bible. I've tried to read the Bible, and I've begun it many times, but then I get to a point and I'm just like, first of all, there's like a couple of pages in the beginning where it's like, this begat that person, begat, and I just think, first of all, why? Like first of all, like, it makes no sense to believe that we're all come from just a single couple. That would make us all inbreds. And I just have a hard time taking the Bible seriously. Now, like, that being said, I never read the full book. So if you have grew up with and you've read the book, then you know things I don't. And I'm not denying that there's no wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom. And stories useful for helping infant intelligence develop morality. I'm not saying the Bible isn't a good source of humanity. And, but the way I view the Bible now is, like I said in my other videos, yes, some people did experience real communication with God, just like I did. But because of our design and because of free will, there is a chance that the experience ended and they continued it being delusional. There's a very high probability of that. That's why the end times, and it's so, it's so religious. Like angels the devil, good angels, bad angels. There's a whole history, for their existence and how they became good or bad. And, so to me, the Bible, it's like a fairy tale for adults regarding who God is and how God creates the universe. Now, like I said, in my adult life, even while raising my children, I would talk about God, but it was always a question mark. I would always say, I don't know if God is real, but if God is real, he's absent and I'd like to know why. And that's as far as thinking as I gave to God. But there were moments, of course, like when I saw a beautiful sunset, or even like when you're having a really nice shower, or when your child is being really cute. Those moments, I would then actually find myself thinking about God and feeling thank you. I love this. This is an amazing life experience, is love and adoration for the environment. And so, but other than that, we never talked about God. I did talk about Jesus, but not that I would preach and teach. I would just talk about my opinions that I believe Jesus must have existed and was real. I don't know whether, he was God's son and what that meant, but I really liked Jesus always. And then I separated from their dad, and I was single mom. They were already teenagers, and I was kind of interested. I was always interested in science, but then I found theoretical physics, and it's just a long story. But one day, through theoretical physics, I concluded that may make no sense to you, but I concluded that God does not read our minds, that telepathy is impossible. And I somehow, this was a very useful, silly idea, but it's kind of what initiated my first awakening. And this is when I was 37. And wait, time flies. Has it been 12 years already? I guess so. But it was in 2015 anyways. And I concluded that we are the multiverses. And that's our souls. They're entangled into the physical universe, which is why the collapse of the wave function. I just feel so silly even saying this. But anyways, it was part of how my first experience started. Because I had this idea, and I was like, okay, if we have souls, and that's what the multiverses are, and they're not part of our physical universe, then Jesus's resurrection would be possible. Because I never really truly believed before that Jesus had been resurrected. And I never understood why Jesus said, I lived before I was born in Bethlehem. Like, how is that possible? What does Jesus mean by that? How can he even make that claim? Like, there's life and death, and I certainly didn't believe in reincarnation or anything like that. I never believed in ghosts. So that idea that we have souls, and that it would explain how uh, God having the power to uh, create life, so resurrect a dead body and then reinserting that soul, could explain Jesus's mysterious side. Unexplainable things, he said. But also at the same time, it meant that telepathy was impossible because, of course, multiverses cannot penetrate each other, right? So that was kind of like this fun idea I played with at the time. It was, like I said, just fun. But I thought telepathy was impossible. I thought God cannot read my mind. And I started to kind of question God out loud. And I did this one time at the theater. But actually, something unearthly happened before that theater experience. Is I experienced something that, first of all, I had no idea was possible to even experience. And that was what I then learned during when the awakening started, was my soulmate bond. And my experiencing my soulmate bond twice is what led me to then see my first UFO. And this is before my first awakening. So my awakening started with my soulmate bond. So if you will, God decided to have children out of love. Everything begins with love. And then my first experience started with my soulmate bond. I did make a video about this, but to spend a little bit of time on it again, soulmate bond, I was laying in bed one night just watching YouTube when suddenly, like a switch, it was literally like there's a switch in your body, just out of nowhere, just like turned on like a switch. I felt like somebody squeezed behind my belly button, but like in my stomach. But it wasn't painful, it was euphoric. So it was like my whole body went into like this physical state of just pure euphoria. But that wasn't even the strange part. The strange part was that as soon as it happened, in my mind, I thought, I have a soulmate and he is near. I have a soulmate and he is near. And the whole experience lasted about 30 seconds. And then, like a switch, it stopped. So here I am in bed. I'm curled up, giggling, thinking about my soulmate, which I never believed in such things. And then the experience ended. And I was just like, okay, what was that? That was really weird. But I'm a very dismissive person. Perhaps, because I've had to dismiss a lot of meaningful things in my life. And I just dismissed it. I totally forgot about it, actually. By the next day, I was in bed again watching YouTube. It was like after 10, when all of a sudden, like a switch. And again, behind my belly button. And it's like, and then, it's the mental state. I have a soulmate and he's near, and that's all that was on my mind. There's nothing else. I didn't wonder what was happening. I was just in my body's in a state of euphoria such as I didn't think was possible. That's why I say it's unearthly. Like, I until you experience soulmate bond, you do not even think that that's possible. It's not something. Think of your most intense physical experience during, you know, it's nothing like that. It's like 100 times more intense. But all I could think about was my soulmate, and he is near. I have a soulmate, and he is near. Again, it lasted like 30 seconds, like a switch off. And this time I was like, okay, I guess I have a soulmate. Who is he? At the time I was single, and I just had a couple of dates. One date with each man that I met on some dating website. And I thought, well, I guess maybe it's one of them. Now, before that, I had no intention of seeing either of them again. But I thought, well, it's got to be one of them because I don't know anybody else. I don't know any other men. So I made a date. I just picked one, made a date, and then I went on this date to have dinner at his house. And he lived, this is when I lived near Sherwood Park. He lived in Leduc. So it's like a 45-minute, because I lived on an acreage at that time. And to his house, it's like 45, 50 minutes. And on the way to Leduc, I'm on the Anthony Highway, and above the city, this was winter, so it was lights everywhere, and even then I needed glasses, especially for nighttime driving, but I didn't have glasses at that time, and so all the lights are kind of blurry. But I'm looking over the city, and I saw really big, it was like a ball of light. Now there's an airport in Leduc, so of course I thought that was a plane landing or something. But then when I got to his house, his window, but then as I'm driving, I could kind of glance at it, and it was always in the same spot. And so I got to his house, I look out the window, which faced the airport, or rather that, I don't know if there's actually an airport there, but which faced that mysterious light. And I I mentioned it to him. I said, hey, can you see that light? It's been there since like the last 15 minutes. He's like, he just glanced out. He's like, oh yeah, that's just a plane landing or something. It's just a plane. And I was like, oh, of course, yeah. What else could it be? Maybe a helicopter. I don't know, but... So I wonder if anybody back in November 2015 had seen this as well. I know he did. So I know I didn't imagine it. He saw it too. Okay? It was there. So whatever, forgot about it. Now, I left early next morning. And I got into my car, and as I'm warming it up, I look up, and the light's still there in the same spot. Now it's dark everywhere. Everybody's lights are off. All you can see is that ball of light. And so I thought, oh, okay, it must be a helicopter because it's in the same spot, right? So maybe they're looking for somebody, but there's no beam of light being said. Regarding the light, there was no beam of light. It was like just a glow. It was like a ball. And so I started driving home kind of didn't stop thinking about it. And then I turn off to the merge onto the highway, and I look and I can see it moving. And now it's in front of me on the highway. And I thought, okay, so it's a helicopter, and they're probably it's heading to Edmonton. And so I just whatever, right? But it was in front of me. And then Anthony Henday, it's been a while since I've been to, I'm pretty sure it's the Henday, but it goes around this city. So like I said, I lived on an acreage outside of Sherwood Park. So all my driving was highway driving. And that's when I realized this light is always ahead of me. And then when I turned off to go the Yellowhead, which I think is one, past Sherwood Park, because I really actually lived by Ardrossan, it's still ahead of me, like literally the same distance. It's keeping about maybe a kilometer, maybe less, ahead of me. Not very high at all, but it's like, and that at that point I started to think, well, why is it going the same way I am? You know, like, if it was following behind me, I could think it was following me, right? But it was ahead of me, and yet it was going the same direction I am. Then I'm about a kilometer away from my turnoff towards my acreage, off of the highway into like the neighborhood, and it stopped right where I had to turn off and parked itself above my neighbor's field. And it was just there in the air. And I, of course, back then I had my cell phone was dead, and I just stopped and I looked out and I was watching it. Like I said, though, like, I should be wearing glasses at night. I wish I had. So to me, it was just a blurry light. But I did notice that, again, there was no beam of light. It was just like contained. So it was like a glow. It was just glowing light. And I watched it, and then I was just like, there's nothing more to see, you know? This is it. I can't take a picture of it. You know, it must be a UFO, though, because back then there was no drones. It's been there for hours and hours and hours. I know helicopters, the lights that they use take a lot of power. And I don't think they last for that long. And at that point, actually, when it parked itself, it was quite high. I don't think helicopters go that high. And of course, airplanes, you know, they always have to move. So I went home believing I saw my first UFO, and I was so excited because that was on my bucket list. And then the next day we had a family dinner, and I told everybody, I said, you know, I saw my first UFO. I told the story of the light. And then a couple of weeks later, that's when I had the whole, you know, multiverse, our souls, no telepathy, ideas that led me to start talking to God out loud. And my dog is making noise. And that is when I asked God a question at the theater. Actually, it happened. I mumbled while I was in the washroom washing my hands. I said, God, if you are real and this is true, then help me brainwash people with this. That's literally what I said. And I didn't think, do you think I ever thought I would receive an answer? Do you actually think? No. But then it was like my own thoughts were thinking back at me. And the answer was no. I will not help you brainwash people with this. I will help you reprogram their thinking. And I just kind of like, and this is like I'm walking back to the theater and I'm, looking for my spot and stuff. And I'm just like, I mumbled, what? And it repeated itself. So remember, the communication is always through memories. So when I say I heard, or, like I had memory, that's why when I differentiate, and there was never a voice. I never heard a voice. If I heard a voice in my head, which I don't know, how do people hear voices? I never ever in my life heard a voice in my head. Like, that would freak me out. If I did hear voices or saw visions, then I would tell you that yes, I'm schizophrenic and extremely delusional, and I'd be on medicine. No, I was on medicine, but never mind that. So I sat down in the theater and I was like, I forget exactly what I said, but basically my very first concern was for myself, because I did make a prayer to God, so this was God supposedly answering me. And then right away I was like, why are you talking to me? If you're talking to me, the devil knows and he's gonna come and get me. That's pretty much the gist of my very first concern was, I don't want attention because the devil is gonna then come after me. And that's the very first thing that God said. There's no such thing as the devil. That's just human imagination. And I believed it, and I just felt like relief. I was like, oh, okay, that's good. So I said, well, what's up? And then I started to kind of try to initiate like a chat, I guess. But there was no conversation. The movie started at this point. I had actually stepped in and it had already been playing. And then 7 things started to repeat themselves. So here I am watching the movie and I have no idea. It's Goosebumps 2, by the way. I have no idea what happened in the movie, because throughout the entire, however the length of the movie is, which I don't know, could be a couple hours, these 7 things just repeated themselves over and over and over and over until I memorized them. So as soon as the movie ended, that experience ended. And those 7 things are the beginning of the source of all my questions. And that is when God told me about the intelligence virus. There is such a thing as the intelligence virus. The intelligence virus is any kind of thinking and believing that hurting someone physically, mentally, or financially is okay. That is the intelligence virus. I had no idea. I was like, intelligence virus? Like, none of it made any sense. And so then, for the next 5 months, I was receiving memories about knowing God from everlasting life. And just like you are thinking, this is not at all, how I envisioned God, God's infinite image, how God appears to us in, like a screen, that God has an infinite number of thoughts and can think them all at the same time, individually, independently. And that is how God can then have a relationship with all of us in everlasting life. So if that was not possible, then we would not know God. You would have to wait your turn if God was like us and could only think one thought at a time. So God is all powerful. But like I said in the beginning, God creates the universe and then steps back. God does not make anybody do anything. So if you've experienced a miracle of somebody changing, turning themselves around, don't think that God made them. Now, that being said, if you are from everlasting life, God ensures your return, because us being born infant intelligence means that we have the intelligence virus. We all do. And it means that some of us act out the intelligence virus. And the way back to everlasting life for us is the same as it is for infant intelligence to choose themselves for everlasting life, which is don't have slaves, do good deeds. Live a life of truth. Seek the truth, like Jesus said. So, if you are from everlasting life, God prepares you before you're born, sold to God's infinite image, and gets your permission to, yes, compel. Because God has never lost a child to the intelligence virus. Meaning, God has never lost one of us who is from everlasting life that chose ourselves to help him raise infant intelligence. So no child has died. All of us return to our Father and our true existences. This is why, if you are from everlasting life, like me, you will experience compellings. And I'm not saying that it's gonna be without fear, without, like, compellings can be very strong. Like, this is wrong. If I do this, I will die. Fear of dying. So that's one thing that you should know, is that people from everlasting life are more likely to fear death than infant intelligence. That's why you have a lot of infant intelligence not afraid to die, whereas we are afraid to die because we're afraid of losing our true existences. Because even though we don't remember everlasting life, we know that if we die, we lose something eternal, almost. So if you're from EL, your fear of death might be more intense and more worrisome than for those who are new intelligence, because they've never met God. They don't have that, I guess, intuition that death is not it, that longing, that we all know God. And also, most of us also know Jesus. So I know, like I said, if you grew up with religion and that seed, then if you are new intelligence, then you might think that you have a relationship with Jesus. You may think that Jesus knows you. And that's kind of what I wanted to lead up to in this video, is that Jesus is a human being. I'm not saying he does not communicate regarding infant intelligence with Father, but he lives peacefully and happily in everlasting life. He lives out his purpose on infant intelligence planets. And like I said, everything has to be the truth. So when Jesus said, I am God's son, he was telling physical truth, because like I said, Jesus was created by God in separate from how we were all created through evolution. So Jesus is not part of evolution. Jesus was created by the power of God with a purpose to choose himself. But Jesus is a human being and has free will just like we do, and has to choose himself to do what he does on infant intelligence planets. But he only has to do this once per universe cycle. But still, it's a very, very hard job. And unlike us, where we're born here with no memory about our existences in everlasting life, Jesus is always himself. And that includes his own DNA. So through the birth, but it's a divine conception, but through the birth, Jesus experiences a continuous existence. Whereas for us, when we return to everlasting life, we don't remember our experiences here because they're not who we are. We are not who we are here on infant planets. Our true existences are in EL. That is who we are. And that is what you will remember, is your true existence, who you are in everlasting life. So if you are from everlasting life, then yes, most of us have met Jesus. That's how Jesus lives his life. He seeks us. He seeks to meet all of God's new children. And God gave Jesus 2 gifts, only 2 gifts. And one of these gifts is that once Jesus meets you, he never forgets you. And this makes us very happy in everlasting life. It means that because coincidences happen in everlasting life too. But you know, once you meet Jesus, he doesn't forget your name, your conversation, anything about you. He remembers you just like God knows all of us. So does Jesus. So God gave Jesus that same ability. And trillions of years can go by before you, like I said, coincidentally, you'll bump into Jesus on some beach, on some remote planet, somewhere in distant universe. And Jesus will be like, "Hey, John, how are you doing? Last time we saw each other was this and that." And then you can talk to Jesus. And again, he'll never forget. And this makes us so happy in everlasting life because, like I said, Jesus has a very hard job. And he visits every single infant intelligence planet. And is so meaningful. And becomes our source of light for infant intelligence because we follow Jesus. Look at the Bible. Look at how God is described in the Bible. And a lot of it is unlikable. A lot of it is so wrong about who God is. And a lot of us don't like that, and we don't want that God. But Jesus is one of us, and he's just a good person, nice person, caring, loving, non-judgmental. And like I said, Jesus is a human being and has free will just like we do. Everything is designed around free will. Please think about that. Think about that Jesus chooses himself to do what he did on the earth, which is to guide as many people, not only during his own time, but in the future as possible to everlasting life by teaching, seek the truth, don't have slaves, do good deeds. And he lives by example. And on earth, he had to do miracles in order for his legend to survive, in order to provide that extra proof. That is how much God loves every single one of you. Every single child that chooses everlasting life is so important to God. But God is intelligence virus free. That means God does not experience anger. God does not experience vengeance or any even thoughts. God has never had a single intelligence virus thought. So that alter ego, as we call it, God is not a human being. God is without that. God is intelligence virus free. So think about that as you read the Bible. And it says that God takes lives of babies and stuff like that. Ugh, that just is so wrong. God has never ever taken a single life. Like I said, God creates and steps back. Now how God raises his infant intelligence is with our help from everlasting life. And everything is designed around free will. Free will is 100% important to God, and God exists by the one law. God follows the one law just like we do. And so Jesus has to choose himself just like us. God prepares him. So Jesus knew he was going to be killed in the way that he was killed. Before my experience, I never learned anything. I never remembered anything about Jesus in my first awakening. It was only in my second awakening that I finally remembered Jesus. And so until that point, it was like a big mystery to me. Like, who is Jesus? Like, just like you. I thought all these things that, we have no other way of knowing except from the source that claims to have all the knowledge, right? And so before that, I thought, that some things I didn't believe, like, first of all, I believed that Jesus got angry in the temple. I believe that because I thought it's wrong to do business in a temple, right? But I didn't believe, back then I didn't believe that Jesus said, "Why have you forsaken me?" when he was on the cross. Because I believed Jesus was holy and, Jesus was more than a human being. So I believed, why would he say that? But after I remembered Jesus, I now believe the reverse. So I don't believe Jesus had a temper tantrum in a temple. I think somebody wrote that in order to make temples some kind of a holy space, which there is no such thing. God can hear you, doesn't matter where you are. You do not have to go to church to seek God. So there's no such thing as holy ground. If you want to believe that there is, it's the whole universe. And so I don't believe that Jesus did that. But I do believe that while he was in pain on the cross, because in everlasting life, it's real life. And we experience pain when we hurt ourselves in the everlasting life. And so in EL, meditation is a big part of our lives. I'm not saying everybody meditates, but most of us do, because it helps us to deal with pain. And so that is what Jesus was doing on the cross. And I believe that what Jesus was doing was thinking about each of us. Because God knows the outcome of every outcome. God already knows if you will choose EL or not. And so maybe Jesus was thinking and meditating on the cross, thinking about the people that he would save, and meditating. And maybe he just for a moment lost focus and then experienced the pain in full and then cried out, because Jesus is a human being, just like us, just like you. And it just makes me love Jesus all the more, that he knew how he would be treated by the governance, of course. And so I know in the Bible it says Jesus is a Lamb of God. But to me, Jesus is a hero because Jesus chooses himself. God does not choose him. God did not offer Jesus. Jesus self-offered. And that's what makes a hero. And in everlasting life, although Jesus' experiences always differ on every infant intelligence planet, that being said, 99.9% of the time he is welcomed and loved and lives out his life peacefully, teaching about everlasting life. He couldn't do that on the earth. It had to be, everything he said that would survive had to be strategic. But to me, it's, the actions of compassion. And then the story about where Jesus stops the procession for a beetle. Because I myself grew up killing bugs. And then at some point, I don't know how old I was, but it was still in my country. I heard that story. And as the first time that I was like, wow, And I started to kind of respect animals, and I stopped killing bugs. Like, I still kill mosquitoes, and flies. I've killed a lot of flies in my life, but I used to kill a lot of ants with my ball. I would bounce it. But anyways, so it's that, to me, that's what shines. That is what teaches us humanity through Jesus's example. And so that is how I view Jesus, is hero. And I know people believe that Jesus will be back, that he's going to rule and be king of the world. But Jesus does not want that. Jesus lived out his purpose. Jesus is done on the earth. But yes, he will be back. But it will be the day after Judgment Day, once the earth is cleansed, once the earth is cleaned up, and it's made ready for everlasting life on Judgment Day. Judgment Day is going to be a very, very busy day. And you're going to go from, maybe seeing the occasional UFO spaceship. This is a jet that I took a picture of May 19th, 2021. It's flying. It's not a boat. And so you're going to go from kind of wondering, are UFOs real, spaceships, this and that, to on Judgment Day, you're going to see hundreds, if not thousands, of spaceships, as people from everlasting life will bring huge trucks and boats and submarines, and using God's technology, they will clean up the entire planet. There's gonna all the garbage. Can you imagine our beautiful earth garbage free? And we do this using God's technology, and all we do is some buildings that will need to go down, that are full of intelligence virus material that we want nothing to do with, just bulldoze those and shove them into big containers. Then you push a button and it literally zaps the contents, the garbage, into the nearest black hole. And that's how we're going to clean up the entire earth, down to the last gum wrapper somewhere in the jungle. We do this with God's help. And for some stuff that we don't want to see, Father tells us to put on our glasses. They're like cool sunglasses. And then it doesn't allow us to see items and stuff that, like, you can think of all the magazines and all the gross stuff, that people own, that people from Everlasting Life just, we know the intelligence virus exists and people act it out, but we don't want no part of it. EL is intelligence virus free. So Jesus will be back once the earth is cleansed. And then it's to meet you. So if you choose everlasting life, you will meet Jesus. And that is the first time that Jesus will know of you. So I know right now, maybe you believe you have a relationship with Jesus. Because it's, like I said in all my other videos, it's in our design to self-talk. And we can do this in any way. And one of the ways that's possible, like first, second, third person, you can be plural, but you can also ask questions and answer. So if you are new in intelligence and you think Jesus knows you, I'm sorry to tell you that unless you choose everlasting life, Jesus does not know you until he meets you in everlasting life. But then he will never forget you. And you truly will make friends with Jesus. But for those of us who are from everlasting life, some of us, yes, may already know Jesus. But that doesn't mean that the conversations that are happening in your head that you're having with Jesus are real. They're all you. Because again, telepathy is not possible, and Jesus is in everlasting life. We are here. And everything has to be the truth, physical reality. So, relationships in our heads are our own creations. If you want to have a relationship with God, you can talk to God out loud. And I'm not saying sometimes, if you are from EL, that you receive true answers from God. But they're kind of like in here. It's like yes, no. Sometimes you will see a sign. You can literally, like, let's say, well, I'm not going to use this. I was going to use a real sign, but okay. You see, for example, a dog on the side of the road, and you feel like you've seen it before. That's how my first awakening was happening. I was getting lots of deja vus from things that God showed me that I would see. So in the past, God showed me what I would see in the future. And then I felt like I've seen it before. And then I would ask God question out loud. I would say, Father, I saw that dog on the side of the road. What am I supposed to remember? And then a memory about everlasting life would come. And this is how God designs everything around free will. So if you stayed all the way to the end, thank you. And I hope that you will return, because I have so much more to say. And I'm sure there's things I forgot to add. Let me quickly think about that. So I can't think of anything that I missed right now. And if you're wondering about Jesus' second gift, I'm going to make a whole video about that. But again, everything's about physical reality. And so it's nothing magical. It still makes us very happy. Both of Jesus's gifts make us very, 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 very happy in everlasting life. So I hope you will return. And for now, talk to you later. Peace.